YouTube, this is going to be a very important video. In this video, I'm going to prove that Karl Marx was an absolute tool of the Jesuit order. I'm going to prove to you guys from sourced from biography.com that Karl Marx was educated at a Jesuit school. I'm going to read to you a passage from multiple books that show Karl Marx's Jesuit ideologies. And guys, what communism is Jesuitism, which is Thomism, which is St. Thomas Aquinas. This goes back to the papal bulls of Unum Sanctum and Unum Sanctum in 1308, and the Crusades under Pope Innocent III and all the papal bulls he signed. That all those papal bulls guys said that the Pope was absolute temporal and spiritual controller of the realm of Earth. Okay, I'm gonna show you here Karl Marx, guys. He's propped up as a Jew because, like everything, guys, they want to blame communism on the Jews. That was a huge part of the agenda with all the fascist propaganda that was going on in Nazi Germany, in Italy and Croatia and Spain and all throughout Europe and America during the late 1800s, leading up to World War One and Two. But I'm gonna show you here, guys. Karl Marx was an absolute tool of the Jesuit order. Okay, it's undeniable. Like he was educated by Jesuits. Okay, I'm gonna show you here. Here's biography.com. I link this in the description. Here you see Karl Marx, journalist, historian, economic philosopher, 1818 to 1833. Okay, published his Revolutionary Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. Okay, which were the basis of the works of Marxism, which is now formed into modern day communism. Okay, look at this here, guys. Okay, this was so in 1815 there was a law banning Jews from high society. Marx was baptized as a Lutheran rather than a Catholic, which was the predominant faith in Trier, because he quote equated Protestantism with intellectual freedom. When he was 6, Marx was baptized along with other children, but his mother waited until 1825 after his father died. But look at this, guys. This is from biography.com. Marx was an average student. He was educated at home he was 12 and spent 5 years from 1830 to 1835 at the Jesuit high school in Trier. Okay, guys, just read that again, guys. This is the founder of this think about how significant this is. This is the founder of the whole modern communist movement. Okay, Karl Marx was educated for 5 years at the Jesuit school in Trier. Absolutely, guys, Karl Marx is a Jesuit spiritual and temporal coadjutor, undeniable. Yeah, you see, at the time known as the Freg Wilhelm Gymnasium, this is where Karl Marx was educated by Jesuits. Let's see if I can find a picture of it here. For 5 years, guys, Karl Marx was educated here. Yeah, it was a secondary school that existed in Berlin. Okay, founded by pietist Johann Wycliffe Heckler. Yeah, you see here, Marx was educated by Jesuits here. Okay, let me see if it's still up. Here's a photo of it. This is the school where the Jesuits educated Karl Marx for 5 years. Okay, let's, there it is, Friedrich Wilhelm Gymnasium, right there, guys. Okay, so this is from biography.com. I got more here to prove it. Okay. Yeah, then after that, guys, Mark started studying at the University of Bonn. Okay, so right there, guys, he's educated by Jesuits for 5 years. Here's a quote from the book I'm going to read to you. I link this in the show notes. It's a good book. You should read it through. It's pretty short, only 80 pages, called Marx and Satan. Okay. You see here, this is what Marx actually made a comment on the Jesuits. Okay. So you see this section, Marx hates whole nations. So now, guys, Marx, the other co-founder of communism with Marx was Frederick Engels. The quote from the book Marx and Satan, page 25. Shifting now from Engels to Marx, Marx's whole attitude and conversation were satanic in nature. Though a Jew, he wrote a pernicious anti-Jewish book called the quote the Jewish Question. Okay, I'm gonna read to you a source here from David Kurtzer, Popes Against the Jews, to show you the guys when Marx is addressing the quote the Jewish question, just like Eric Dubé does and all the anti-Semitic shills. It's how the Jesuits addressed bashing the Jews throughout the Catholic press. They'd say, "What are we gonna do about the Jewish question? The Jews are everywhere, etc." All this propaganda, right? Okay, but this is from 1856. Karl Marx wrote in the New York Tribune an article entitled "quote The Russian Loan," in which we read. So this is from Karl Marx, guys. We know that behind every tyrant stands a Jew, as a Jesuit stands behind every pope. This is Karl Marx speaking, guys. He was educated for 5 years by Jesuits. As the army of Jesuits kills every free thought, so the desire of the oppressed would have chances of success, the usefulness of wars incited by capitalists would cease. If it were not for Jews who steal the treasures of mankind. So he's going into pure Jesuit rhetoric here, guys, and he just said the army of Jesuits kills every free thought. It is no wonder that 1856 years ago Jesus chased 800 or 1856 years ago Jesus chased the usurers from Jerusalem temple. They were like the contemporary usurers who stand behind the tyrants and tyrannies. The majority of them are Jewish. The fact that the Jews have become so strong as to endanger the life of the world causes us to disclose their organization. Their purpose, that is, stench, might awaken the workers of the world to fight and eliminate such a canker. So, does that sound like Karl Marx is pro-Jewish, or does he sound like Karl Marx is a Jesuit tool? It sounds to me like he's a Jesuit tool after reading that passage that he wrote in the New York Tribune in 1856. Again, I'm going to quote. This is from Karl Marx. As the army of Jesuits kills every free thought, so the desire of the oppressed would have chance of success. the the usefulness of war is incited by capitalists would cease if it were not for the Jews. Okay, so take that in. So, guys, so this is more. And Karl Marx, the Jew, had more extreme Jesuit-inspired anti-Semitism than even Adolf Hitler. Well, like Adolf Hitler's book Mein Kampf was written by Bernard Stampfel. That's sourced in The Secret History of the Jesuits, page 137. Okay. And you guys, many other Jewish communists, papal Jews, imitated Marx in their hatred of Jews. Okay, interesting there. So guys, I'm gonna remember. So guys, take it in what Karl Marx just said about Jews. Okay, and I'm gonna read to you from. See, let me get my screen here. Okay, I'm going to read to you a quote from The Popes Against the Jews by David Kurtzer. Okay, page 146. Okay, in these years, the Jesuit journal, the Civica Catholica, continued its sympathetic reporting of the growing anti-Semitic movement. An 1893 piece, for example, told of the rising anti-Semitism in Germany, where although the Jews were a small minority, the banks and the actually, I'm gonna go back to the Marx quote while I read this. Okay. I just want to show you the book I'm reading out of, so you know I'm not making this up. Okay, this is what Marx said right here. Um, an 1893 Jesuit La Civitta magazine article said, "quote the banks and the money are for the most part in their hands, the Jews' hands, which makes them incredibly powerful. Not only were the Jews numerous among the professional classes there, but they had taken over the press, and as a result, the Jews' influence on public opinion, on political life, and intellectual work is disproportionate, and what is worse, it is highly corrosive." This is from Jesuits. Okay. Every Jewish writer, in effect, defames and holds in contempt, ridicules and tries to destroy all we hold dear, all of our Christian principles. Same principles. Read what they did in Croatia. The Jews agreed. The Jews' greed for gain dominates everything he does. That was from the Civica Catholica, a Jesuit magazine. Okay. As the end of the century neared, which anti-Semitic outbreaks growing more common, Jesuit Father Bellarmine kept hammering on these themes. In 1897, he warned, quote, "The Jew remains always in every place immutably a Jew. His nationality is not in the soil where he is born, nor in the language that he speaks, but it is in his seed. For the Jew," he quotes, "the best country is one that provides him with the best means of accumulating gold. The Jew makes us laugh when in Italy, France, and Germany he pretends to get mawkish over his tenderness for his nation. The Jew's emancipation had produced just what the Church had feared, quote, his domination via the two most potent forces that rule the world, the press and money. From Poland through Hungary, Austria, Germany, and France, the Jews had begun to put in effect their secret plan for world domination." And this is the Jesuits who are saying the Jews are planning world domination, guys. This is coming from the Jesuits. Okay. Through the years, only the Catholic La Civerta Romano was closer to the Pope in the Vatican hierarchy than the Civica Catholica. It was owned by the Holy Sees. La Servitor had been found in Rome in 1861. With Rome's annexation to the Italian state in 1870, it became in effect the Vatican's official daily newspaper. By the 1890s, the Secretary of State regularly authored unsigned articles in its pages making known the Holy See's opinions of matters of current concern. The Jesuits Vita Catholica and the Catholic L'Observatore Romano were the two publications viewed throughout the Catholic world, offering the clearest explanations of the Pope's own perspective on the issues of its day. In 1892, with the anti-Semitic movement gaining force in Europe, L'Osverto Romano devoted a series of articles again, guys, to the what? The Jewish question. Okay, guys. Just like Marx, where does Marx say the Jewish question here? Where he says it right here. The, like, and you see, like the rhetoric. Marx is saying that the Jews have become so strong and powerful. Like, when you see what I'm reading to you guys. This was the exact rhetoric that was coming out of the Jesuit press in Europe at this time. Let me find this here. I know he says it in this book. Here, guys. Yeah, so guys, right here is at the top. So he wrote. So guys, Karl Marx wrote an anti-Jewish book called The Jewish Question. And here, guys, you have an article in 1892 by the Vatican press newspaper, La Sverto Romano, which devoted a series of articles to the quote Jewish question. The series began by adding a new wrinkle to the old belief in a Jewish conspiracy. Of concern to the Vatican paper was just distributing increase in sympathy for the Jews prompted by revolution, for the violence that had been increasingly aimed at them. Let me see here. So just you see here, guys. I think that's enough quotes. We see here. This is the exact same rhetoric that the Catholic Church was pushing. Okay. Um, okay, that's enough. But you see here, this is the exact same rhetoric, guys. Okay. So I want to show you, and just more proof, guys, that communism comes from the Catholic Church. This is from the Catholic Encyclopedia, talking about the reductions in Paraguay, which I'm going to read to you from another source, show that they come from the Jesuits. This is from the Catholic Encyclopedia, quote, from the conditions of property. The economic basis was a sort of communism. The land and all that stood upon it was a property of the community. The land was apportioned among the caciques who allotted it to the families under them. Agricultural instruments and drought cattle were loaned from the common supply. No one was permitted to sell his plot of land or his house, called abama, i.e., own possession. The individual efforts of the Indians owning their indolence soon proved to be inadequate, whereupon separate plots were set aside as common fields, called in the Dubaba God's property, which were cultivated by common labor under the guidance of the padres. The product of these fields were placed in the common storehouse and were used partly for the support of the poor and the sick, widows, orphans, church Indians, etc. Partly as seed for the next year, partly as reserve supply for the unforeseen contingencies, and also as a medium of exchange for the European goods and taxes. The yield of the private fields and the private effort became the absolute property of the Indians and was credited to them individually in the common barter transactions, so that each received in exchange the goods he desired. Those Mbamba plots which he gave smaller yield became the faulty individual management, were exchanged from time to time. The herds of livestock were also common property. The caballos del Santo, which were used in processions on festival occasions, were especially reserved. Okay. Look at this, guys. This is from the Catholic Encyclopedia on the economic conditions in Paraguay. Look at this, guys. I'm going to highlight it again. The economic basis was a sort of communism. Karl Marx, guys. See here, educated at the Jesuit school in Trier for 5 years. Okay, and here's a quote some more. This is from The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. Okay, this is just I want to just give you some more context on the reductions. Okay, in Paraguay. The unsuspecting Indians were easily seduced by acts of kindness, and the result was that in the course of a brief period, they succeeded in establishing a number of what were called reductions, or more properly speaking, villages with multitudes of Indians assembled about them, the whole aggregating in the end several hundred thousand. These constituted the Jesuit state. You guys, you saw here, it was from the Catholic Encyclopedia. It was a communism. Communism is how the reductions were run. Okay. So these constituted that Jesuit state and were all, by mere ceremony of baptism, brought under Jesuit dominion. At each reduction, the natives were allowed to select a secular magistrate with limited and important powers over the temporal affairs, as could be entrusted to them without impairing the theocratic feature of the government. But in order to provide against the possibility of permitting even these few temporal affairs from being conducted independently of them, they adopted the precaution of providing that before any important decisions were carried into the effect, they should abstain their sanction as quote spiritual shepherds. There is never anywhere a more thorough and complete blending of church and state together. Okay. So although this new state in Portugal was established under the pretense that it was necessary to protect the natives against the bad influences of the Spaniards and the Portuguese, the approval of it by the King of Spain, Philip III, was obtained by the promise that, quote, every adult must pay him the tribute of $1. The consideration of the chief importance with him, Philip IV, was equally disposed in favor of the Jesuits, presumably for the want of proper information, for it would have been required but little investigation at the time to discover that the only motives for the Jesuits for securing royal approbation in Europe was that they might ultimately acquire power to plot against European royalty itself. Okay, that's exactly what happened, guys. All the European royalty now are are in a state of submission to the Jesuit order. If you watch my video, you see one of the chivalry orders in Sweden, the Royal Order of the Seraphim, has the Jesuit IHS on their logo. Okay. To show how little obedience was paid to the public authorities of either Spain or Portugal, it was only necessary to observe that each reduction was governed by a Jesuit father. Okay, guys, the Paraguay reductions were governed by Jesuit fathers. Supported by a vicar and a curate as assistants, but whose chief duty was espionage, this governing father was under the orders of a superior. Okay, the Jesuits are all about obedience, who presided over a diocese of 5 or 6 parishes, the supervision and management of the whole being lodged in the hands of the provincial, who received his orders direct from the general in Rome. If therefore the King of Spain and Portugal supposed that the Jesuits in Portugal intended to pay fidelity to them or to either of them, they were deceived, as in the course of the events they discovered. They obeyed their general in Rome and him alone. Okay, the Jesuit general is literally viewed as God, as Jesus Christ. Like they will do anything their superior tells them to do. Okay, it's absolute obedience. It's in the Jesuit oath. Once you go into the Jesuit priesthood and even become a Jesuit coadjutor, you're submitting your free will. Okay, it's fucked up stuff. The Jesuit maxim saying, "Give me the child for 7 years, and I'll give you the man." Okay, continuing. The praise not ought to be withheld from the Jesuits that the natives who were thus brought under the Jesuits' influence were better and more kindly treated than those who were compelled to submit to the dominion of the Spaniards and Portuguese beyond the limits of Paraguay. They partook of their labors, of the amusements, of their joys, of their sorrows. They visited daily every house in which lay a sick person, whom they served as a kindest nurse, and to whom they seemed to be administering genii. With these other kindnesses, they brought the Indians to look upon them with a friendly bordering upon idolatry. So this guy's talking about how the Jesuits were mind controlling the native Indians in Paraguay at this time. Okay, but whilst they were friends, they were also sovereigns and governed with absolute unquestioned authority. This was a necessary and indispensable part of the Jesuit system of government, which embodied the Jesuit idea of a Christian republic. It was in everything pertaining to the management of public affairs an absolute monarchy. Okay, guys, we saw from the Catholic Encyclopedia the Paraguay reductions were, quote, a sort of communism, with all of its powers centered in the general at Rome, whose authority was accepted as equal to that of God, and to whose command obedience was exacted from all. Apart from this governing authority, universal equality prevailed. The principles of socialism or communism, very much now as understood, governed all the reductions. Everything necessary to the material comfort and prosperity of the Indians was in common. Each family had a portion of land set apart for cultivation. They had also learned trades, but many of them, both men and women, became experts. But the earnings of the whole were deposited in common storehouses at each reduction and distributed by Jesuits in such portions to each individual as necessity required. Okay, so the Jesuits were completely in control of the commerce, okay, and the food, everything. It was a complete Jesuit monarchy in Paraguay. Quote, even the meat was portioned from the public slaughterhouses in the same way. The surplus produced remaining after these distributions was sent to Europe and sold or exchanged for fares and merchandise, solely at the discretion of the Jesuits. Everything was conducted in obedience to them, and nothing contrary to their orders was tolerated. Rigid rules of conduct and hours of labor were prescribed, and the violators of them were subject to corporal punishment. Houses of worship, colleges, and palatial residences for the Jesuit fathers were built by the common labor and at the expense of the common treasury. Look at this guy. Suffrage was universal, but the sanction of the Jesuits was necessary to the validity of the election. In fact, says Niccoloni. You guys should read the book, The History of the Jesuits by Niccoloni, published in 1855, I think. This one I'm from R.W. Thompson, The Footprints of the Jesuits, was published in 1894. From Niccoloni, quote, "The Jesuits substituted themselves for the state or community, a fact which fully established the monarchical and theocratic character of the government." Okay. So I think you get the idea here. So you pull out, guys. The Jesuits are using communism in Paraguay. I just want to show you something here. The Jesuits were mind controlling these natives. Where is it? They're getting the natives to view like the white Spaniards as like white devils. As you saw here, as I read, guys, the Jesuits were completely like taking care of the natives. Like the natives were slaves to the Jesuit priests. Okay, find this quote here. In the chapter on Paraguay, you can find the quote. Let me see if I can find it for you quick. Here, actually, here, guys. So, this is how some of the Jesuits were mind controlling the Indians. Um, so, quote that they had come under 31 great populations, producing immense riches to the society, while the people themselves were kept in the most miserable slavery. That no Spaniard or Portuguese were even governor or bishop was ever admitted into the reductions, that with strange deceit the Spanish language was absolutely forbidden, that the Indians were trained to an unlimited blind obedience, kept in the most extraordinary ignorance, and the most unsufferable slavery ever known, under a complete despotism as to body and soul, that they did not know that there was any other sovereign in the world than the Jesuit fathers, and knew nothing of the king or any other law than the will of the holy fathers, that the Indians were taught that the white layman adored gold, had a devil in their bodies, were the enemies of the Indians, and of the images which they adored, that they would destroy their altars and offer sacrifices of their women and infants, and when consequently to kill, the Jesuits were told them they were consequently taught to kill white men wherever they could find them, and to be carefully cut off their heads lest they should come to life again. Because you see here, guys, the Jesuits create race wars all over the world, guys. Doesn't matter what two races that they can pin against each other, they're gonna create race wars. Okay, so that's just proof there, guys, that the Jesuits have mastered the craft of communism. Karl Marx was educated at a Jesuit school, and again, guys, look what Karl Marx said about the Jesuits. Okay, and take into context from the quotes I read to you from the Catholic press around the same time as Marx was around. They were pumping out all the same anti-Semitism, saying that the Jews and Freemasonry were plotting to take over the world, saying that the Jews controlled the banks, all that crap. Okay, this is from Karl Marx. As the army of Jesuits kills every free thought, so the desire of the oppressed would have chances of success. The usefulness of war is incited by capitalists would cease if it were not for the Jews who steal the treasures of mankind. Okay. It's proof, guys. Karl Marx was a Jesuit tool. Okay, communism is a Jesuit creation. Okay, yeah, that's all for this one, YouTube. Peace and love.